Imagine, for a moment, an American citizen sailing the vast, lonely stretches of the Pacific or the Caribbean. They spot a jagged rock, a tiny speck of land not found on any standard map, shimmering white under the tropical sun. If that citizen steps onto that shore and plants a flag, a law signed in 1856, long before the Civil War, before the light bulb, and before the airplane, kicks into gear. It grants that individual the right to claim that land as a pertaining to territory of the United States. The catch: the island must be covered in bird excrement. This is the story of the Guano Islands Act, a piece of legislation that remains active in the United States Code today, Title 48, Chapter 8. It is a forgotten relic of a time when the world's superpowers weren't fighting over oil or data, but over white gold, the nutrient-rich droppings of seabirds. This law didn't just spark a gold rush of filth. It fundamentally reshaped American foreign policy, birthed the American empire, and created legal gray zones that still haunt international courts in the 21st century. The hunger of the earth to understand why the U.S. Congress would pass a law about bird poop. One must understand the desperation of the 1840s. The Industrial Revolution was booming, but it had a fatal flaw. The soil was dying. Farmers in the United States and Europe had overplanted their fields for generations. The nitrogen and phosphorus in the earth were depleted. Famine wasn't just a threat. It was a mathematical certainty unless a miracle fertilizer was found. That miracle arrived in the form of guano. For thousands of years, millions of boobies, cormorants, and pelicans had nested on arid islands off the coast of Peru. Because it never rained there, their droppings didn't wash away. They baked into mountain-sized heaps of pure, concentrated nitrate. It was the most potent fertilizer known to man. By the 1850s, the British had a virtual monopoly on Peruvian guano. Prices skyrocketed. American farmers were panicked, pleading with the government to find a way to break the guano monopoly. In response, the U.S. government did something unprecedented. They didn't just look for a trade deal. They empowered private citizens to become imperialists. The law of the bird on August 18, 1856, President Franklin Pierce signed the Guano Islands Act. The law was deceptively simple. 1. If a U.S. citizen discovers a deposit of guano on an island, rock, or key not within the lawful jurisdiction of any other government. 2. And if that citizen takes peaceable possession and occupies it. 3. Then the island may, at the discretion of the president, be considered as pertaining to the United States. This was a radical departure from international law. Normally, a country claims land through state-sponsored exploration or war. This law allowed any person, a merchant, a sailor, a thrill-seeker, to unilaterally expand the borders of the United States. It was the finders keepers rule of international diplomacy. Suddenly, the hunt was on. Sea captains who had spent their lives hunting whales now turned their scopes toward any white-capped rock in the sea. Within years, the U.S. had claimed nearly 100 islands. Many of these names are now footnotes in history: Baker, Howland, Jarvis, Midway, Johnston Atoll. But the story of one island, Navassa, would expose the dark, bloody reality of this forgotten law. The tragedy of Navassa is a tiny, pear-shaped limestone plateau located between Haiti and Jamaica. In 1857, a sea captain named Peter Duncan claimed it under the Guano Islands Act. By the 1880s, the Navassa Phosphate Company had turned the island into a literal hellscape. The work was backbreaking. Black laborers, many of them former slaves or descendants of slaves from Maryland, were lured to the island with promises of high wages. Instead, they found a sun-scorched rock with no fresh water and no shade. They were forced to dig phosphate with hand tools in 100-degree heat, carrying heavy loads down treacherous cliffs to ships waiting below. The legal status of the island was a nightmare. Because it appertained to the U.S. but wasn't a state or a formal territory, the workers had no constitutional rights. The company acted as the government, the judge, and the executioner. They used flogging and starvation as punishment. In 1889, the tension snapped. The workers rose up in a bloody rebellion, killing 5 white overseers, the U.S. Navy was dispatched, and the mutineers were brought to Baltimore to face trial. This led to one of the most important yet forgotten Supreme Court cases in history, Jones v. United States, 1890. The defendants, lawyers argued that the U.S. had no right to try them for murder because Navassa wasn't actually American soil. It was just a rock where a law allowed them to pick up bird poop. The Supreme Court disagreed. They ruled that the Guano Islands Act was constitutional. By doing so, they established a precedent: the U.S. government could acquire territory without making it a state or giving its people the right to vote. This Guano law provided the legal blueprint for the later acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. The American empire was built on a foundation of guano. The law that refused to die as the 20th century dawned, the guano gold rush ended. Scientists figured out how to synthesize nitrogen from the air, the Haber-Bosch process, and bird poop lost its value almost overnight. The islands were abandoned. The shacks rotted, the birds returned to their quiet solitude, but the law remained on the books. And in the age of modern geopolitics, these worthless rocks suddenly became more valuable than the guano they once held. Why? Because of the exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Under modern maritime law, a country's territory extends 200 nautical miles from its shores. A tiny, uninhabited guano rock in the middle of the Pacific suddenly grants the U.S. control over thousands of square miles of ocean, including fishing rights and underwater mineral deposits. In the 1960s and 70s, guano hunters made a comeback, not for fertilizer but for radio. Amateur radio operators, or DXers, would use the Guano Islands Act to claim sovereignty over remote rocks so they could broadcast from a new country. More seriously, the act has caused lingering diplomatic friction. Haiti still claims Navassa Island today, viewing the 1856 law as an illegal act of 19th century imperialism. To this day, if you look at a U.S. map, Navassa is listed as a U.S. minor outlying island. If you look at a Haitian map, it is part of their sovereign territory. The ghost of a 170-year-old law about bird droppings remains a point of contention between two nations. The modern legacy even today, the Guano Islands Act is technically enforceable. If you were to find an unclaimed, guano-covered island in international waters tomorrow, you could, in theory, file a claim with the State Department. It stands as a bizarre reminder of a time when the world felt infinite and the laws were being written on the fly. It represents the intersection of agricultural desperation, corporate greed, and the birth of a global superpower. Most Americans walk through their lives never knowing that their country's reach across the Pacific and Caribbean began not with a grand vision of democracy, but with a frantic search for high-quality manure. The Guano Islands Act is more than just a weird law. It is a living artifact. It tells us that the past is never truly dead. It's just buried under layers of history, waiting for someone to dig it up, much like the very substance that inspired the law in the first place. Continuing the journey through the bizarre basement of American legislation, we move from the high seas and bird-covered rocks to a 50-square-mile strip of land in the heart of the American West. This is the story of the zone of death in Yellowstone National Park, a legal loophole so profound that it suggests, due to a constitutional oversight, one could technically commit the perfect crime, and the government might not be able to seat a jury to convict them. The constitutional glitch, the zone of death in the vast, geyser-filled expanse of Yellowstone National Park. There is a remote section that falls within the state borders of Idaho. While most of Yellowstone is in Wyoming, small slivers cross into Montana and Idaho. To the average hiker, it's just beautiful wilderness. To a legal scholar, it is a constitutional no-man's land. The Sixth Amendment trap the loophole was discovered in 2005 by Brian Colt, a law professor at Michigan State University. It hinges on the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees a criminal defendant the right to a trial by a jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. Here is where the gears of the law grind to a halt. 1. The district. Congress has placed the entirety of Yellowstone National Park under the jurisdiction of the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming. This makes Wyoming the only federal district that crosses state lines. 2. The state, if a crime is committed in the Idaho portion of the park, The Sixth Amendment requires the jury to be composed of people who live in both the state, Idaho, and the district, Wyoming. 3. The problem, the only place that satisfies both criteria is the tiny 50-square-mile sliver of Idaho that sits inside Yellowstone. The population of that sliver, 0. Because no one lives there, a jury cannot be legally formed. Without a jury, and without the defendant's consent to waive their right to one, a trial technically cannot proceed. A warning ignored when Professor Colt discovered this. He didn't try to go on a crime spree. Instead, he did the responsible thing. He wrote a paper titled The Perfect Crime and sent copies to the Department of Justice, the FBI, and members of Congress. He warned them that a murderer could use this loophole to walk free. The government's response? Silence. Federal officials essentially argued that fixing the loophole, which would involve a simple legislative tweak to redraw the district lines, wasn't a priority because no one had murdered anyone there. Yet, the real-life test, the loophole, almost faced its day in court during the case of U.S. v. Belderain, 2005. A man was charged with illegally shooting an elk in the Yellowstone portion of Montana, which has a population of only a few dozen people, making a jury difficult but not impossible. The defendant tried to use Colt's zone of death argument to get the charges dropped. Instead of addressing the constitutional loophole head-on, the court took a shortcut and ruled that the defendant couldn't challenge the jury selection because he had already taken a plea deal. The loophole remained open, unaddressed, and as dangerous as ever. The Walking Dead law, the ghost of the 14th Amendment. If the zone of death is a geographical glitch, our next stop is a biological one. In several U.S. states, there are laws that still technically classify certain individuals as civilly dead. Historically, civil death was a punishment where a person lost all civil rights, the right to sue, to marry, or to own property, as if they were deceased even though they were still breathing. The life insurance loophole in New York. Section 79A of the Civil Rights Law states that a person sentenced to life imprisonment is deemed civilly dead. While modern courts have stripped away the most draconian parts of this, you can't just steal a prisoner's watch and say he's dead. It's mine. The law has created surreal scenarios. In some cases, the civil death of a prisoner has been used by families to attempt to collect life insurance policies or to dissolve marriages without a divorce, as the law technically considers the person to have passed away the moment the prison doors locked. Why do these laws still exist? You might wonder why a modern superpower like the USA allows these relics to linger. The answer is a mix of bureaucratic inertia and the complexity of the common law system. Inertia. Changing a law requires time, political will, and floor time in a legislature. Most politicians don't want to spend their limited capital fixing a 19th century law about bird poop or a remote Idaho forest unless a disaster forces their hand. The safety of silence. Sometimes fixing a law opens a can of worms. If Congress officially addressed the Guano Islands Act, they might have to settle the territorial dispute with Haiti over Navassa Island, which could lead to diplomatic headaches they'd rather avoid. The takeaway: these laws serve as a reminder that the legal framework of a nation is like a sprawling, ancient mansion. We live in the modern, renovated wings, the apps, the digital privacy laws, the modern tax codes, but the basement and the attic are filled with dusty, strange, and sometimes dangerous machinery from a completely different era. The Guano Islands Act gave us an empire. The Yellowstone loophole gives us a constitutional riddle, and the civil death laws remind us how the law once viewed the very soul of a human being. The ghost of the Constitution legalized piracy. If the Guano Islands Act was about finding white gold on the high seas, this next law is about who is allowed to hunt on those seas. Tucked away in Article I, Section 8, Clause 11 of the United States Constitution is a power granted to Congress that sounds like it belongs in the 1700s, yet it has never been repealed. The power to grant letters of marque and reprisal, in plain English. This is the power of the United States government to hire privateers, essentially legal pirates, to attack and seize the ships and assets of an enemy nation. The birth of the privateer. To understand why this is still in the Constitution, we have to look back at the American Revolution. When the 13 colonies declared independence, they had a major problem. They were fighting the British Empire, which possessed the most powerful navy in the world. The Americans, by contrast, had almost no navy at all. Instead of building a massive fleet they couldn't afford, the founding fathers did something clever. They issued letters of marque. These were legal documents that turned a private merchant ship into a privateer. A privateer wasn't a pirate. A pirate was a criminal who attacked anyone for personal gain. A privateer was a government-authorized contractor. They were allowed to hunt British merchant ships, seize their cargo, and sell it for a profit. The government got a cut, the ship owner got rich, and the British economy was crippled. It was crowdsourced warfare. The law that America refused to sign by the mid-19th century. The rest of the world wanted to end this practice. In 1856, the major powers of Europe signed the Paris Declaration respecting maritime law, which officially abolished privateering. But the United States refused to sign it. The U.S. Argument was that as long as it didn't have a navy as large as Britain's, it needed the right to call upon its private citizens to defend the country at sea, even though the U.S. eventually stopped issuing these letters after the Civil War. The legal authority to do so remains active in the Constitution to this day. The 21st century pirate hunters. You might think this is just a historical curiosity, but in the halls of modern power, the letter of marque has made a shocking comeback. After the September 11 attacks, a congressman named Ron Paul introduced a bill, the Marque and Reprisal Act of 2001, that would have authorized the president to issue letters to private groups to hunt down Osama bin Laden and his associates. The idea was to put a bounty on terrorists, allowing private specialized teams to go where the official military might face diplomatic hurdles. More recently in 2022, as tensions rose in the South China Sea, and with the threat of modern maritime gray zone warfare, several high-ranking military scholars and even some politicians suggested that the U.S. should revive letters of marque. They argued that private contractors could be used to counter the fishing militias of rival nations without triggering a full-scale state-to-state war. Even in the digital realm, there is talk of cyber letters of marque. Some legal experts suggest the government should authorize private cybersecurity firms to hack back against foreign attackers, essentially becoming digital. Privateers to reclaim stolen data. The walking purchase, and the land of eternal debt while the sea was governed by letters of marque. The land was often governed by even stranger legal fictions. One of the most fascinating, technically existing, legal nightmares involves the 1872 mining law, signed by President Ulysses S. Grant. This law was designed to encourage people to move west and civilize the frontier. It states that any U.S. citizen can go onto public land, find a valuable mineral deposit like gold, silver, or copper, and stake a claim. The loophole of the century here is the amazing part. Under this 150-year-old law, you can still patent, buy the land from the government for as little as $2.50 to $5 per acre. While there has been a moratorium on new patents since 1994, thousands of existing claims are still governed by the 1872 rules. This means that multi-billion-dollar international mining corporations are still extracting billions of dollars worth of gold and minerals from American public land today. And because of this ancient law, they pay zero royalties to the U.S. Taxpayers, every year, attempts are made to modernize this law, and every year they fail. The 1872 mining law remains a zombie law, a relic of the Wild West that continues to dictate 21st century economics. The invisible borders, why these stories matter, these laws, the Guano Islands Act, the Zone of Death, the letters of marque, and the 1872 mining law reveal a fundamental truth about the United States. The law is a living archaeological site. When you look at a map of the world, you see solid lines and clear borders. But if you look through the lens of these forgotten laws, you see something else. You see a world where a piece of bird poop can create a colony, a park boundary can create a zone of death. A 200-year-old sentence in the Constitution can authorize modern mercenaries. A $5 bill can buy an acre of gold-rich mountains. For a foreign audience, These stories dispel the myth that American law is a perfectly oiled modern machine. Instead, it is a messy, fascinating, and sometimes contradictory collection of patches applied over centuries. It is a system that still holds the door open for the adventurous, the opportunistic, and the clever, provided they know which forgotten book to look in. The final mystery, the law of the unknown. As we conclude this journey into the forgotten corners of American legislation, one question remains. In an era of satellites, GPS, and total surveillance, are there still guano islands out there? In 1997, a man named Bill Warren tried to claim a newly surfaced volcanic island in the Pacific under the 1856 Act. The State Department spent months scrambling to find a legal reason to deny him. They eventually did, but they had to admit that the law was still there, waiting for the next person to find a rock, a bird, and a dream of empire. The forgotten laws of America are not just dusty papers in a basement. They are the hidden source code of the country. They remind us that history isn't just something that happened. It's something that is still being enforced every single day.